Okay, hi everybody. Today I'm going to present the first CMCC-EDITS webinar series. This is basically the first, and we plan to have each year at least two webinar of this type. And I guess the following one will be by the end of this year. Just a few words about what EDITS is. Basically, EDITS is a network that brings together experts that do research on energy demand issues. And this network is coordinated by the Research Institute of Innovative Technology for the Earth and by IASA, and it's funded by the Ministry of Economy, Trade and Industry in Japan. What are the main goals of the EDITS network? First of all, is to create a research community with a focus on end-use demand-side perspectives. Second, it aims to improve the state of the art of demand modeling in environmental and climate policy analysis. And as a final goal is basically inform policy via structure model experiments and simulations that assess potential impacts, barriers, and synergies and trade-offs to other sustainable development goal objectives of demand-side policy interventions. Now, briefly, for those who are new for this type of webinar, these are the rules. Basically, audio and video are deactivated to all of you. But if you need to intervene, ask questions, clarification questions during the speech, you can use the raise hand button that you should all have, and I will give you the possibility to talk. But anyway, at the end of Nuno's speech, there will be a question and answer session where you can basically pose your questions. So you can use the Q&A button to raise your questions. Now, without any further ado, I want to present the speaker. Today's speaker is Nuno Bento, who is a researcher at the Center for Socioeconomic and Territorial Studies in Lisbon. And today he will talk about potential co-benefits of digital convergence and sharing economy on both climate targets as well as decent living standards. So Nuno, the floor is yours, and you can share your screen.
Thank you, Cristina. Thank you for coming. Good morning, everybody. I'm going to share my screen. A second. So first of all, I would like to thank the EDITS initiative and also the European Institute for Economics and Environment for the invitation to present in the first online webinar of EDITS. So it's a great pleasure to me. It's a great pleasure to have the opportunity to present the results on my researches on appliances and on well-being proportionated by these appliances. So as you can see, the title of the presentation I have for you today is about promoting better lives is good for climate. So the idea here, or the main question, is how is it possible to provide decent living standards, so to promote, to improve the lives of millions in the global south without going against the climate objectives, the climate goals. The importance of decarbonization is well known. The last report of the IPCC has put even forward the need for action and an immediate action. And so how can we actually fulfill the legitimate aspirations in the global south with this climate constraint? And actually here, the key, the main focus to analyze this question, or the way that we can conciliate this, would be in the potential, in the co-benefits that we can have in developing some trends of technological change in order to provide access to consumer goods, to essential consumer goods, in a way that actually brings us environmental co-benefits in terms of reduction of emissions, of course. So here is the outline that I prepared for the talk of today. I will start by presenting some unsustainable trends in appliances. Then I'll move on to present some emergent digital enabled innovations that can be of relevance to counteract these unsustainable trends. Then I will present the way that I simulated or created a scenario to measure the impact or the influence of the digital convergence and sharing economies, particular digital innovations that then can be helpful in the solution of this problem. I will present the results of these simulations before I conclude. So firstly, let me start with one graph that perhaps most of you may already have seen. Probably some of you already worked on this graph. So this is from the 6th assessment report of the IPCC published last April. So this graph shows us the pathways, the optimal pathways for bringing down emissions to more safe levels. Let's put it that way, to allow to limit global warming to 1.5 or below 2 degrees Celsius in yellow and green respectively. So what is important here to note is that firstly, emissions should occur in the next 2 to 3 years and start reducing to half of the level of today, around that by the end of the decade, until to keep on track with the objectives to stabilize by the middle of the century. But on the other hand, if we compare with the actual data, we are becoming to be a bit far away of the target. So this actually is it's a message to, or an illustration of the message for the need to act right now. But here, what I would like to pinpoint for the aspect that we are bringing here in this talk about the appliances is that buildings is among the highest sectors, the sector that emits the highest right after industry. So, and what happens in buildings is that these emissions have been increased in the past few years, and in a special category in buildings, actually the emissions have increased even more, which is in appliances. So appliances pushing the emissions in buildings, which is amongst the most emitting sectors. Already in the original study of 2018, low energy demand study, and this I'm showing you the graph on top left, we see that appliances is the only sector considered or modeled in this study for which final energy demand increases in 2050. So increases 15%. So there is something to be done here in this sector. The past data, so the past trends actually shows us an increase in the energy demand. So the energy demand has increased. So I'm showing you, referring to the graphic in the bottom left. In the past decade, the average growth has been around 3% in the appliances, and they already reach, or they account for 15% of final electricity demand prior to the beginning of the pandemic. One particular item in appliances that is pushing or contributing to this dynamics is the dissemination or the explosion of smaller devices that actually are increasing much more than major appliances, even though they don't consume a lot, but in large numbers, they can actually already have a sizable effect. And the most important of all this I would say, is the fact that for a long time, efficiency has contributed to counteract or to reduce the effect in the demand for appliances, in the growth of the demand of appliances. So some of this effect has been compensated by increment improvements in energy efficiency, but what is relatively new, let's say in the last 5 to 6, 7 years, is that the trend to efficiency improvement has leveled off, has stabilized, especially for the major appliances which consume a lot. So finally, and to conclude this first slides on the sustainability of the trends in appliances, let me talk about one major characteristic, one major feature of this sustainability, which is the inequality of access. So this is, I'm not going to pass a long time on this. This is well known. Just let me give you some illustration, which is about the ownership of devices, of essential devices for normal living in the 21st century, having access to the medicines, refrigerated medicines, to prepared food, hygiene and stuff. And let me just compare the situation in Africa with the average in the global world, the global north. So for items such as TVs, refrigerators, and washing machines, we have pretty much universal access in the global north. Ownership rates, meaning a number of devices per 100 households is well over 90. In case of TVs, is approaching the 100. But when we compare to Africa, these numbers are 17 for TVs, 10 for fridges, and only 2 for washing machines. Of course, there are many factors, many variables that can explain that difference. Right away, we have the problem of the lack of the access to electricity. So over 700 million people still don't have access to electricity. China, Sub-Saharan Africa, South Asia, but there is also economic aspects as well. Even though the prices of appliances have decreased in the past decades, they are still high. The prices are still high for many people in terms of purchase power parity, or there are even some variance in the prices between even regions in the south. For instance, refrigerators or TVs can cost more in India than in Brazil, for instance. So all this compared to the fact that the access in 2021 remains highly unequal. That means that the possibilities of having a life with access to essential energy goods are not the same depending on the space where the people live in the world. And actually, that raises again the main question: how is it possible to conciliate a better and more equal access to essential services and goods with the energy and climate goals? And in the couple of next slides I'm going to show you, I'm actually bringing the approach that we can actually have an answer by potentiating technological and social innovation trends that exist already and that can come here in a helpful way to improve the provision of access to those people without having more effects in terms of energy demand or increased emissions. So the first aspect, so we're passing to the emergent digital enabled innovations. I'll have mainly 2, and the first one is digital convergence. I'm sure pretty much of you already know, have seen already this illustration from the LED original study. We have made some additional estimations in terms of the amount of embodied energy and materials that can be saved by this convergence into multifunctional objects. Just a reminder, smartphones or multifunctional interfaces like smartphones can save at almost 2,000 devices, so several dozens of devices, reducing the energy needed in terms of several times, 30 times has been estimated in terms of power of use to get the same type of services, having a camera service or GPS or a radio, listening radio, whatever. So you can do it much more efficiently without consuming the same energy for standby, for instance, and without the need to buy and produce these avoided devices. So with much less embodied energy. So this is the first actual trend. And this is interesting because it's not just about the mobile phone. It's about the way that things are developing right now. For instance, yesterday I was talking with someone much older, and I was telling that person, well, tomorrow I'll give a seminar about the way that digital convergence can help us to improve the access to essential goods in the future and reduce emissions. That person actually gave me an interesting example, is that like nowadays, since that person receives, during the day, the last news on the things that the person values the most, he's not feeling the need anymore to stay 1.5 hours watching the news in the evening. And instead, because he already saw the relevant news, so he doesn't have to wait for that news to happen. He already read it more profoundly. And instead of staying 1.5 hours at the front of a TV, that person is taking the time to go for a walk. Like you are seeing people are actually having the same essential services in a different way, consuming much less resources. In that case, that was energy. But there are people that decide not having more a TV, for instance, because they actually are doing what they need already with this multifunctional object. Second main emergent digital enabled innovation that can be helpful in reducing the emissions and improving access to the essential services in appliances is the sharing economy. Sharing, not owning, actually allows people to have access to the same services in terms of communication, in terms of food preparation, you name it, in a way that is less intensive in energy and less intensive also in materials with a lower carbon footprint. This is not a thing that happens only in buildings and appliances, of course. We already see this happening in mobility, for instance. I'm just presenting an example for ride sharing, which in 5 years ago was already responsible for displacing the sales of over 2 million cars globally. And since ride sharing hasn't stopped growing since 2016, so we would expect that that figure of 2 million is much higher right now. So that gives us actually the same analogy that we expect to see with appliances. So people sharing more instead of using or owning the goods, sharing the service. And because they share the service, there is less need to consume, to buy the stuff, to buy the devices, and less devices needed to be produced. So in the normal situation that we would think in buildings is co-living. And has been, the previous studies have been shown that co-living actually has many benefits to reduce the energy demand and the emissions. And one of these studies actually estimates this benefit in terms of halving the carbon footprint per capita. But there are some contingencies in the way that sharing can be used. Is more of an urban phenomenon, but on the other hand, we see that the urbanization rates are expected to increase in the coming decades. On the other hand, this actually it's much easier to develop in multifamily buildings, and there are some devices, some consumer goods which are more prone for sharing than the others. Easy sharing consumer goods, we can think about washing machines or water heaters, for instance.
No, sorry, before you go on, there is a question
Sure.
which asks whether there are studies that analyze what happens with the products which are replaced by a smartphone. For example, they are still used for other purposes or not. So do we know anything about displaced items substituted by smartphones?
That can be repurposed, correct?
Yeah, rather than discarded, do we know what happens to those appliances?
Well, I must say that I don't have that that answer. I cannot think of any study that has thought on redirecting appliances that have been avoided by digital convergence. Yeah, that is my best. I don't know. Probably there are some studies to be done on that and the way that it can affect sustainability. I was thinking, for instance, in terms of you know, cameras or GPS that they are not, or Wi-Fi systems that they are not used anymore because people are now having access to the services through the mobile phone. But yeah, I cannot remember of any, but probably there are some research to be done on that. Sorry.
And
Sorry.
I see a raised hand by Manuel Castrillo, but I don't think I can give.
Cristina, let me just finish probably with this slide, which actually closes the second chapter. And if there are questions, I can stop there and take some questions. Okay.
Okay. Perfect. Yeah.
Perfect. Thanks, Cristina. So this graph actually is not a trend, but this actually replies to a common question, which is, well, we are switching you know, hardware to software. So we are switching the appliances, the old appliances and major appliances by electronics. But actually electronics, even though they are very efficient in usage, they consume a lot in production. So this graph actually compares a refrigerator with, you know, small electronics here represented by a mobile phone. So we then normalize for the same lifetime of 15 years. Of course, the mobile phone has a normal lifetime of 3 years only. So we can see that the profile of energy consumption is totally different. You know, for a major and a traditional appliance, most of the, or 2/3 of the energy consumed, the total energy consumed during its lifetime is direct energy consumption, it's direct electricity. And only 1/3, it's about embodied energy. So the energy needed for production of the material and for disposal. Whereas this reverses completely for an electronic. We're talking about 3% only for direct energy, all the rest for embodied energy. But what is interesting here and this actually gives us opportunities to think about how actually this shift can be helpful, is that not only the total energy can be reduced here, you know, if we normalize, we're talking about four times less total energy used. But, you know, I'm aware that we are talking about sometimes different services. But what is here important is that the new electronics actually are very efficient in use, but the amount of embodied energy, which actually sums the greatest part, can be reduced. There can be strategies to reduce the embodied energy through material management, such as circularity, dematerialization, and all other types of this material management strategy. So not only the direct energy is reduced, is very low, but there could be other leverages to reduce even more the other part of embodied energy. So with that, I close this chapter. Before passing to the next one, where I explain how I did some simulation, how I calculated the effect of all these trends, I can take some questions. Cristina, please.
Well, I just opened the floor to those who have questions. It's your time now to, for example, raise your hand or use the Q&A button.
Let's take only one or two, because
actually there are not. I mean, there was a person that raised the hand before, but now I don't see the hand anymore. Mm-hmm. Or no, okay, now, sorry, Okay, Edward Toulouse, if you want, you can talk, and maybe the organizer can give, because I just see that he wrote, there are two worrying trends with digitalization, but then I can't see anything else. So in case you want to talk, please raise your hand. Okay.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we do.
Thanks a lot. Thanks for the presentation. Yeah, there are obviously two worrying trends with digitalization. The first one is while we used to keep our cameras and other stuff for maybe 10 years, we are changing smartphones every year or a couple of years. And so, in fact, we are also having reduced lifetime. And the second one is, of course, all the digital infrastructure behind the appliances, so the data centers, networks, antennas, and so on. They are growing very quickly, and they are raising a lot of issues. And so as regards this aspect, we are not seeing any progress so far.
Cristina, can I answer to Edward?
Yes, please. And then I just tell that there is another question from Quartieri Giuseppe, and then we can stop here and keep your questions at the end. So please answer, and then I will ask the second.
Yes, thanks a lot, Edward, because your question is probably the question of many more here, not just only here, but also in the other places. From your accent, I would say that you're coming from France, right?
Correct.
All right, good, great country. This question is particularly high in the press and even in the books in France. There are lots of passion in the way that the evidence is presented. Let me just go to what we know. So what we know is that, and this is a study from Freitag, not long ago from this year, which actually has compared many studies that did meta analysis of the impact of digitalization. Digitalization is a lot of things. It comprises the mobile phone, it comprises the internet, comprises the base stations, comprises lots of stuff. So they normalized everything and compared lots of studies, and they came up with the worst case of around 3% of electricity consumption. Electricity or energy consumption. So the main point here, and with that, I kind of give you also my perspective, is that if you think on the type of services that with this 3% we are having, from internet to mobile communication to having access to entertainment, you name it. So this is probably reducing already more than one order of magnitude of energy that otherwise we would need to have other devices and have other demands of energy in order to fulfill this needs of communication, needs of internet access, and so on and so forth. So already in terms of the benefits to cost, it seems like the digitalization is already contributing. Of course, there are issues. Of course, the infrastructure consumes, but even in terms of infrastructure, there are studies from people from Berkeley showing that actually the way that the efficiency is improving is contributing to not let the consumption of energy increasing from the data centers, for instance, even though the throughput is much higher and is increasing year per year. But, this is contagion, this is polemical. There are studies doing meta-analysis showing this, and this is the best evidence that I can bring right now here. And I thank you again for raising the question. Cristina.
Shall I allow one more question to Quartieri Giuseppe? Giuseppe, if you want to ask. We can't hear you.
Probably he has the muted the micro. So.
I guess the organizer should give him the right to speak.
Hello?
Okay.
Hello.
Yes, we can. Yeah.
Can you hear me, please?
Sure.
Yes, we do. Please go ahead.
Okay, thank you. I would like to express my appreciation to the presentation made by Nino Bento. Very nice, very interesting, and particularly is very interesting this comparison between electronics appliance and the standard of life. I'm quite sure I do appreciate it, and I appreciate the fact that the electronic could improve very much the standard life of people. However, this is not the improvement of the real quality of life. Standard of life is different, it's quite different from quality of life. In some kind of people, some people do not need any very high level standard electronics. They can live a much better quality of life apart from the increase of electronic applications. This is my point, you know. I just make this kind of objection or comment. That's all, you know. That's all. Thank you.
Thank you, Giuseppe. Yeah, I think you raise a very important point. My only answer would be, you know, we are talking about the basic the access to the basic services such as hygiene. I would think that if people in the south would have or some people in the south would have access, for instance, to a washing machine at home or in the building, that would improve their life. Or if they have a fridge where they can store the medicines, they would feel much relief. So it's that type of things that we are discussing right now. Of course, you are absolutely right. Sometimes the electronics are not bringing much joy to our life, but yeah, you know, this is another question. Now, right now, it's just about, let's talk only about the essential goods and services for the South.
Anyway,
thanks for your question. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, I think you can continue. There are questions, but I guess we can keep them for the end of your presentation.
Thanks, Cristina. So without further delay, I'm passing to the way that actually I operationalized the benefits of digital convergence and sharing in order to bring down the emissions in appliances and give access. So I'm using the ASI framework. It stands for activity, structure, and intensity. This is namely developed in the last proposition paper, working paper, as you prefer to call it, from EDITS, written by Arnulf, Greg, Shinali, and Charlie on the narratives group. So the total energy, I'm hearing. Could you please mute your phones, because I'm having some sounds.
Ottavia, can you unmute Quartieri Giuseppe?
Thank you. Because otherwise I couldn't. The sound I was receiving was a bit loud. So the total energy demand from appliances could be, disaggregated into the activity, structure, and intensity. So households and ownership, pretty much, representing the activity, the structure, from actually is the weight of each one of the main categories: hygiene, food preparation, thermal demand, and intensity, of course, the energy consumption per device. The U stands for the use, so the load factor, the use of the device, and the W stands for the wattage, the power of the device. So those things together divided by the number of devices. So there are segments that I'm going to treat more in detail in the next slides. So I will explain how I calculated base growth, so the change of demand from 2020, from today to 2050. I calculated the needs in terms of decent living standards. So we're pretty much talking about, the number of devices that are needed, and the way that I calculated also the impacts of digital conversions which actually impacts the weight, because there will be some types of some categories of appliances which actually are not going to be needed as much. So the weight of these categories will going to decrease, so the structure will change. And for sharing economies affecting both the category and the energy intensity. So let me start by the base growth. I forgot one thing to say in the previous slide is that, this departs from the GEA 2012 study, then the LED 2018 study for appliances, but actually we started with the higher number of appliances. So we enlarged the number of appliances in the study. We have a more granular representation of appliances, both for the residential sector and the commercial sector. And we have also a more granular representation for the geography. So instead of having only global north against global south, we have 11 regions of the world. Having said that, the way that we calculated the needs in terms of appliance in the future was looking especially to the revenue. So this is, of course, a simplification, but revenue remains a major driver of demand in terms of appliances. And we observed, as we can see in this graph on the left, we observe a high correlation between the differences in GDP per capita of the regions, the average GDP per capita of the regions, and the levels of ownership that we observe in this region. So we take this high correlation for the situation as we observe today, and we use the projections for GDP per capita by region from SSP2, and in order to reach the projections or to estimate the number of devices demanded by region in 2050. Of course, this is then calibrated by some factors in order to give, estimate some saturation factors. I'm going to show you more on this in the scenario generator. So in terms of decent living standards, we depart from an observation, again, from the LED, is that there is a huge difference from the number of appliances per household in global north than in global south. So we are talking about 1/3 less number of devices in the global south in 2050. So what we did for this study was we take the normative assumptions or what defines a decent living standard in terms of having access to a different type of appliances, such as mobile phones, TVs, refrigerators, stoves, or lamps. So we take this from the literature, and then we compare the ownership as calculated in the base scenario with the minimum threshold. So by region, we compare if the ownership that exhibits the estimates actually, how does it match with the minimum threshold? What would be the number that actually fulfills the minimum threshold for all? And then from that, we estimate the additional number of devices that would be needed in order to ensure decent living standards for all. Let me give you the results for the number of devices that would be needed. We calculated in 8 billion devices needed, additional devices needed in 2050, distributed in this way by the different types of devices. So let's put it more emphasis on the way that actually food preparation stoves and ovens, and on the other hand, thermal demand actually need more devices in order to fulfill decent living standards in the global south, in different regions of the global south. But in the next slide, we can see the distribution of the devices per region of the global south. We see that food preparation, stoves and ovens, it's high in all the prominently high in all the regions, and also especially in regions in the southern areas. Thermal demand is also very important, for instance, in South Asia and sub-Saharan Africa. And finally, this is the last graph I have for decent living standards. Most of the needs in terms of additional devices to ensure the decent living standards actually are concentrated in two areas. Sub-Saharan Africa and South Asia. This concentrates around 60%. And if we had Latin America, we actually are talking about 80% of the additional devices needed in order to ensure a decent living standard. So this was for decent living standards. Now, let me just give a word about the way that I estimated the effect of digital convergence. So the idea here, this scheme remembers the idea of, physical, basically the idea is physical objects and services being passing by physical objects going into digital, with interfaces, modular objects like the mobile phone and apps. But here, for the activity, the idea was to translate this this situation when actually some devices are disappearing because they are integrating other devices. So they are actually converging into other multifunctional devices. Some of these devices, some TVs, PCs, and small loads can keep converging, and people having access to these devices more and more in the future. And perhaps in a couple of years or decades, we are not talking anymore about these devices. So this contributes to reduce activity. For the energy intensity, actually, we decided not to change the energy intensity because if there is first of all, these small electronics are very efficient, as we have already seen in the other graph. And on the other hand, load factor increases can be compensated by the efficiency improvements. So with all that, and I show you here a table below for the number of devices that can be avoided in global north and global south for type of devices. We estimate about 17 billion devices that can be replaced by multifunctional devices. That means that people still have access to the relevant services, but in a different way, without having the need of more devices and using these multifunctional devices much more intensively in the mixed use. And this actually can also attain the commercial sector as well.
Nuno, just a time check.
30 minutes, right?
Yeah.
Perfect, thank you. Then for sharing economies, here the assumption, this of course is concerns a bunch of different types of devices, from lamps to washing machines, water heaters, refrigerators. Of course, the main idea here is that some appliances can be shared at the multifamily house level. So especially in the case of co-living, we can have the case that when some of these appliances, such as a refrigerator, can be used by several households. And this, so in some of the appliances, or refrigerator, or the oven, or the stove, actually a tenth of the normal number of appliances used in individual households could be enough to actually provide access for a larger community doing co-living. For the energy intensity here, first, we the opposite, we consider an increase, given that there will be a more intensive usage of the devices. So that can come through an increased load factor, or through a much powerful device, or both. We have considered this hypothesis, and at the end we estimated around 20 billion devices that can be avoided by sharing instead of owning Air or is devices. So in order to further fine-tune some saturation effects, and also in the future, because this is going to become available after the paper be published to the users, in order to change the parameters, the key inputs, we have developed a kind of scenario generator where actually it's possible to change the main variables concerning activity, decent living standards, assumptions on sharing, assumptions on digital conversions, on the rate of efficiency improvement, of the rate of reduction in material intensity. So this gives a tool for the user actually to create, to test the assumptions, to create further scenarios, to, for instance, check whether if the sharing economies or the digital conversions is not evolving like expected, how should it be compensated by efficiency improvement or the other way around? So this is a tool that also can be helpful in the future for more people doing analysis in the appliances. So for the impacts, let's turn now to the results. This slide actually shows on your right side and top the impacts in terms of activity, and down the graph in the bottom the impacts in terms of energy demand. Now, starting with activity, this is a cascade graph. We start with the levels today, 2020. Let's consider this really a figure of today. Then the base growth, then gives us the additional number of devices that are needed in order to promote decent living standards for all. Then number of devices that can be saved with digital conversions and with share. And actually, we arrived to an increase of digital conversions and share helps to reduce the amount of the devices estimated and needed in the future, but still to more than the double, 135% more than the number of today. But what is interesting here is that because most of the devices actually are not needed, were major appliances that consume a lot, it is possible through a better utilization of the appliances, a better distribution of the appliances, and then an optimization of its use to reduce the energy demand, even though with more appliances to reduce the energy demand to 28% comparing to the levels of today. Of course, prominently here is the lower average energy consumption per device. There are also some effects, of course, because we're talking about sharing, we're talking about devices disappearing. So it's important to have a sense of the materials that are saved, the reduction in material consumption. And here we have estimations for the weight of materials being used in 2050 comparing to today, and the volume of these devices. And what we see is that not only the energy demand reduces, but also the weight of the devices. Remember, more devices than today, almost double, actually reduces in terms of weight and in terms of volume. If you have more questions about the way that we estimated the material consumption, I can briefly tell you, and then we can talk more, of course, that in the Q&A session. Actually, we proceeded by correlating the devices, the wattage of the devices with their weight, and there is a strong correlation actually. If we do that, with all the typical products representative of the products in the sample, there is a big correlation between the wattage and the weight, and between the weight and the volume. And through that, we can arrive to typical, let's say, to representative material intensities of devices also by region, and then multiplied by the number of devices, we can get the estimations of the weight and of the volume. Finally, let me show you the social gains of decent living, of the digital conversions and sharing, considering decent living standards as well. So this graph compares the situation when there is only the normal base growth of the numbers. Remember that this base growth is pretty much equivalent to the growth in appliances as in the low energy demand study of 2018. So we compare with this growth in this number in 2050 gives us the index 100. And then compared to that 100, we show different situations, so different variables. So comparing to the growth in the previous studies, let's say, the coverage is higher, of course, because we are considering decent living standards for all. So it's above 100%, which is a good thing. But the number of devices is, of course, lower because of the digital conversions, because of the sharing. And this is also a good thing, because actually this allows people to have access to the same services with the less devices, so less cost. That's why cost is reduced, because there is if there is less devices to be bought, there is less money spent in the devices, so that improves also the access to the device. And the energy demand also reduces as well, compared to the levels based in the base scenario for 2050, and the material weight that is necessary that enters into these devices. I have, and this is my final slide before conclusion, I've estimated also the potential for emission reductions. So this gives us this graph, the graph on the left, gives the CO2 emission reductions by region. So comparing to the case in 2050, this gives us the lower emissions in this new scenario per region, and in terms of the dots gives the percentage of the emissions in terms of 2020 of today's emissions. And we can see that with all this different organization of the way that the appliances are used and are produced, actually we can reach emission and a level of emissions that is much lower compared if we take the today's terms, so which it's 58% of the emissions that is actually consumed, emitted by appliances in today. So with that, I arrived to my last slide, which is the conclusion. Access to appliances, this is important to remind, because it's also access to well-being provided by this appliance remains highly unequal. The growth in demand of appliance threats climate targets. This is evident. Digital convergence and sharing. So this digital innovation enabled trends can help to provide more access to those that don't have access right now. This can be done with lower costs, reducing energy demand, lower materials consumption, and also lower emission of carbon or pollutants. And this work is developing a tool that can simulate the effects of social and technological trends like this one and other narratives that user may create, and test the effects in the appliances, which actually are having more and more weight. Important, and remember that we are now in the dynamic of reducing all the emissions, so it's very important not to have a sector that is increasing, the emissions with that dynamic. With that, I close my presentation, and I'm happy to take questions. Thank you.
Thanks, Nuno. Well done, both in terms of content and in terms of timing. There are questions in Q&A sessions. I probably won't be able to address all of them, but I guess you will have the chance to read and have all of them, and in case answer in a different setting. But I can start. I mean, there is one question that has to do more with the dynamics, because I guess what you did was just considering the status quo of the North ownership and see what are the implications if the South is catching up. But the question is whether this digitalization will further widen the North-South gap, because clearly there is a dynamic. And if I can take the opportunity, I have a kind of similar questions, because we know that in the North we do have already, like for some appliances, every household have one, but what about the air conditioning? So there is still dynamic in the North in terms of increasing the use of AC. So what happens if there is dynamic in the North and a catching up from the South, also for this appliance? You are muted. Sorry, I don't know why. Okay.
Thanks, Cristina. I think there are circumstances where actually it's true that the gap digitalization can enlarge the gap between north and south, and the whole point is always to reduce the gap, right? Here, the presentation, I was more concerned with the idea of providing with the essential stuff to the south for those that don't have access to the essential services, hygiene, food preparation, thermal demand, and this type of services. So it was pretty much the focus. I recognize that the digitalization can enlarge the gap, but there are also some possibilities that digitalization can offer. Because of the fact that this is granular, this is lower cost, it can be more easily adopted by regions with low economic resources, endowments. I give you the example of some financial services. It was interesting to note that some financial services, the way that money was transferred with mobile phones and other bank services were actually using the new mobile communications, actually was developed first in several countries in Africa, then the way that it developed then in the global north. So that gives us an illustration that it's not that digitalization will always enlarge this gap. It can also create opportunities because it's more granular to the communities in the south to improve their situation.
There is a clarification question. Does the 28% less energy demand in 2050 include the energy used to produce the extra devices or just the energy consumed by them? And also, does lower material intensity automatically imply lower energy intensity for production?
So first question is about...
sorry, there is background noise. I don't know from where. Okay.
Someone is using a vacuum cleaner to illustrate our talk about appliances. First question about, I'm talking more with energy use, so electricity consumption. And then for the material analysis, then we talking more. Right now, I only showed the weight and volume. There are also estimations in impacts in terms of consumption of important materials such as steel, plastics, and aluminum. But embodied energy is not considered here because it's more complex, and we should have a different talk or more time to go into that. So let's just stay now with direct energy, so electricity consumption.
Okay, another question. There is a lot of digital technology with potential to reduce energy consumption, but in reality is more often used to improve convenience and thus rather leading to an increase of energy consumption in terms of capture as embodied energy. Is the usage in reality studied, and are there insights about what needs to happen for the savings potential to materialize?
Yeah,
so first rebound, yeah.
This is about rebound effects. There are studies showing that, of course, rebound effect is an issue. There are people, since LED has lowered so much the cost of lighting, there are people using more LED for decorative purposes. But of course, the improvement has been huge. And there are also studies showing that, for instance, from Gillingham, that the rebound effect is not that high as very often speculated. I'm not saying that Volker is speculating with a rebounding effect. I'm just bringing this discussion from the literature. Of course, in terms of embodied energy, this is another discussion. But there are also and this was the proposal of my slide, there is also room to think that even though there is more energy consumed in production, for instance, with the electronics, like my mobile phone, the overall total emission remains lower compared to the traditional, the conventional devices, which actually consume a lot also for production. It's not negligible, and consumed also more for the direct energy use. And also with that I close, also because there is a trend of dematerialization, right? You know, the devices that we have today are much lighter than devices that were built, you know, in the previous years or previous decades. So that helps also to reduce that embodied energy.
Okay, according to the practice of rapid obsolescence in products, what can be the recommended options to combine energy and economic return with an environmental ethic?
Yeah, this is a huge problem, the obsolescence, and but this is not only in appliances. This is right away in apparel. You know, this is all the story about the fast fashion. So it's not unique for the appliances sector. And there are also a legislation in some countries. Edward, for instance, we're talking from France. In France, there are rules about obsolescence, for instance, of mobile phones, of electronics, like mobile phones. If the company is proved to do some obsolescence techniques, the amount of fines are quite substantial. So there is a regulation stick to be developed, and then of course the implementation, because regulation without implementation is almost like no regulation. And there are you know, more research to be done in this area of obsolescence. Just a minor note about because there was also the case of mobile phones for which the obsolescence has been improving, so meaning that the lifetime of the mobile phone is reducing. I'm not quite sure if the lifetime of the mobile phone has been reducing in the past 2 years, because what I've been assisting is that since there is a scarcity of electronics right now in the past 2 years, I'm more and more seeing offers, not just here in my country, in Portugal, but even in the internet, in Amazon, where you can watch offers, for instance, in the American market, of more and more secondhand PCs, secondhand and refurbished cell phones to be sold, almost, you know, side by side with new ones. So this is a good developing, and I would like to see more in the future.
Thanks. There is a clarification questions about examples. So hasn't the most of potential for digital convergence already been achieved through the development of smartphones? Can you give an example of how digital convergence might occur in the future with other types of appliances? So this person can see how it would be possible with cooking, with kitchen appliances.
Well, already, if we look at our appliances in the kitchen, there are plenty of appliances that are converging several devices. I am not talking about Alexa and this smart talkers, or what they are called. I'm not talking. Yeah, let's take for instance the smart refrigerator, which actually is converging lots. You know. Services from the computer, an organizer, timer. So there is no just the refrigerator. There are also, you know, smart cookers where you can even download a recipe, and it tells you what you have to buy in the shop in order to put in the fridge and to be able to produce the recipe, the cooking you want. So there are plenty of cases, not only in appliances. You have also, even in remaining in appliances, you can have, you know, if you go to a hotel right now, the screen that you see in lots of hotels when you arrive to your room, you have multi-functions in the screen. You can do pretty much everything that before you would need a phone, you would need several things. Now you can do everything in the screen. So these are examples with appliances. Of course, I could give example with the cars that are becoming, you know, iPads on wheels, with everything converging into the infotainment and stuff. But only to stay with appliances, we can think of plenty of examples, not only the mobile phone. But everything working with apps, that's the important. So it's not just the interface. So you can use the same app, you can have access to your account and everything pretty much with your mobile phone or another interface. So it's the platform idea that actually brings everything, all this ecosystem together.
Okay, thanks. It's 1:05, so I think we met our time slot. There are still a couple of comments, some suggestions to conferences or readings, but I guess, Nuno, you will have access to the whole set of questions. You will see that some have been answered, some not, but you can just benefit from all of them. So thanks again for presenting, and goodbye to everybody.
Thanks, Cristina, and thank you everybody for your attention and for your questions. And if you have more questions, please feel free to send me an email. I'll be happy to reply to you. Thank you for your attention. Goodbye.
Ciao, bye-bye.